I'm going to try to do this with a voiceover versus just trying to do it as I'm doing this mechanically. This is the spark plug change on the generation Sebring Convertible, which is 1996 to 2000. You have to take off the upper intake manifold, so there's some junk you have to go through. First, I'll disconnect the battery. I don't know if that's 100% necessary, but I do it. That's a 15 millimeter bolt, or you just use an adjustable wrench on that. It doesn't have to be, I think, wait a minute, it's a 13 millimeter bolt, excuse me. The next, you'd have to disconnect the air intake, where it goes into the air, from the air filter to the air intake. Now, this is an aftermarket air filter, so it's a little different, but it's basically just one screw to take off. And there's not much different. That was a $40 aftermarket part on eBay, if anybody's curious about that. It supposedly gives you a little bit more mileage. I don't know about that claim or not, but it probably would make a slight difference, if any at all, but only $40. Then the next thing you have to do is disconnect the idle air control. That's on right there where I'm disconnecting. You just unclip it, pull it down. Okay, that's it disconnected. The next thing is the throttle position sensor. I mean, it doesn't have to be in this order. I'm just showing this. This is on the driver's side now. Okay, that's a TPS throttle position sensor. And you disconnect the vacuum hose up there on the top. Okay. And you go on to the passenger side, and you're going to disconnect a couple things over here. And the first thing, this gray one, I'm disconnecting this here. That's the air temperature sensor, or it's also called the IAT, which is intake air temperature sensor. Second one I'm disconnecting here is the manifold absolute pressure sensor. Just unclip it, pull it off. Okay. Now on the coupe, it's a different one from the convertible if you're buying a replacement part. I'm going to go over that a little bit though. And the next thing, you have to disconnect the throttle cables. So what you do is you have to pull them out to the side. You open up the throttle all the way, pull them out to the side, and you're going to see them out in a few seconds here. I don't think I was able to do this. I just went out to just set the camera down and did it, and turned the camera back on. But you open up the throttle all the way, and now they're disconnected. You can see they're in there with these, the ends of the wires that are held in. You just open up the throttle all the way, so there's enough slack in the cable. Put them out to the side, and the bracket itself is held on by these two bolts, which are 10 millimeters. Okay, those are the two bolts. That's the bracket for the throttle itself. Then this is the EGR return tube going to the EGR exhaust recirculation valve. Those are two bolts that are held in there by, those are 8 millimeter bolts. Okay, 8 millimeters, two bolts. And there's a gasket on there, and I just used, I reused the gaskets, just used some copper ATV, okay, to seal it up again. You don't need to buy gaskets every time. Then there's a vacuum hose in the back, and that's an aftermarket clamp on there. So there's a vacuum hose right there. I just stopped it a second. And so when you pull that off, and now also in the back of the manifold, there's a couple bolts, one on each side, that goes to a bracket that supports the manifold. You don't need to reinstall those. Most people don't. I never have. They weren't even installed when I got the car years ago. But they might be something that you have to take out. They're a pain to take out. The intake manifold itself has 7 bolts. They're 12 millimeters. Okay, that's the size that you have, socket you have to use. I'm not saying the bolt size, the thickness of the bolts. I'm always saying the socket size. Okay. 12 millimeters. They're torqued down. When you reinstall this, they're torqued down at 168 inch-pounds. And that's working from the center outwards, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. torque from this, torquing them out. You know, that's 14 foot-pounds or 168 inch-pounds. You should use it. Now there's a ground strap right here. If you notice this ground strap, let me get on to the other video here real quick. There was that ground strap. Now I took the manifold's basically out, you know, it's just laying on top of the engine. You can see this is where that rear intake hose went to. Now there's another hose down here in the bottom, a very small one that goes to the EGR. And I'll point to the one hose, and here's the big hose. But there's another one right below it that goes to the EGR. And this is where the exhaust gas recirculation pipe goes to. Those are 8mm size bolts. That's the socket size, and this is where the throttle position bracket, or wherever the throttle bracket goes to. Those are 10mm bolts. Okay, and these threads can be repaired if you need to be, because I repaired this. I repaired several of these because they had helicoils in them and they were not very strong, and they fell apart after a while by previous owners. So I redid them with McMaster. You go to McMaster.com to get steel inserts for them to do properly, and they'll last a lot longer than original aluminum. And that's the I just pulled off the small vacuum hose in the back. And if you look right here, you can see this right here. This is where, if the car was never, as it came from the factory, this particular bolt back here is like goes to a bracket, and a lot of times they're not reinstalled, but I didn't reinstall them, and they weren't even in the car when I got them years ago. So, but if you do, you might have to take this bolt out. This is a bracket that goes to a bracket in the back. They're very much a pain to get to. So, like, people don't like changing spark plugs on these cars because the three in the back, you have to remove all this stuff to get at it. But this is how you do it. And also, you might want to check. You can see this hose here to make sure it's like a plastic. To watch out that it's not broken someplace, and because the car will run rough because the EGR, exhaust recirculation valve, will not work correctly. Alright, so basically that's it. This takes about 20 minutes to take off the whole thing. It's not a big deal. I want to show something else here. This is these are the parts that are installed on the upper intake on the driver's side, and this was your idle air control valve. That's the one that was on the right side as you're looking at the vehicle from the front. That's on driver's side. And idle air control valve. You can see there's just a couple screws that hold it in. There's a rubber O-ring that seals it. And then this one is the TPS, the throttle position sensor, also on the driver's side of the upper intake manifold. And that's disconnected. But that's what these parts look like outside of the car. I mean, they're very simple to change if you need to change them. And then on the passenger side of the upper intake manifold, you have your air temperature sensor, also known as the IAT, which is intake air temperature sensor. It just screws in. That's what it looks like. Sometimes they can just be cleaned, and that's usually sometimes what's all that's wrong with them, but they're very easy to change. And then you have your manifold pressure sensor, manifold absolute pressure sensor. That's why they call it the MAP sensor. And it's just two screws. There's a couple O-rings that seal it from so the vacuum doesn't have a vacuum leak at the upper intake manifold. And that's basically all there is to that. You know, when you're doing this, it's not so daunting. I think the worst thing about it is if you strip out screws on this stuff, because a lot of times it can happen because the cars are older, and this manifold seems to come off for many different things you need to do. So it's aluminum, so after a while bolts will strip out, but they're not that difficult to repair. But the way to do it is not with the helicoils. I would go to McMaster and get the proper stuff, and I'm probably going to cover that in a later video to show exactly what the sizes are for, you know, what you need to do, because I'm going to go over another video on you know, just take this, you have to take out the upper intake manifold, then you can do your distributor a lot easier. So I'll go over that next in another later one.